The thing that we're faced with in the world is what I call self-preservation. We have to eat, but it's not just physical self-preservation, it's psychological self-preservation. It's why we exclude, because we psychologically need to survive. And so what I found in Jesus, in the Gospel of Matthew especially, was that he was asking us to turn from a system of self-preservation to a system of self-sacrifice. And it's the exact opposite world in which we're tending to live in. And in fact, it's why Jesus' first words as he started his ministry was the word repent. And I had always understood that word repent means you bad people need to stop doing bad stuff. But that's not what it meant. Literally that word means, and Jesus wasn't talking to the bad people in the world. He was talking to his disciples when he said that word. He was talking to his own people, the church, his own disciples, the followers. He said, you need to turn from the direction you've been headed and go in the opposite direction. I think that's the challenge I found in the book of Matthew, that the meek shall inherit the earth, the outcast, everything that we think is great, it's the opposite. And Jesus has called us to live into a whole different worldview of what being great means, what it looks like. And it does not look like the picture that's being painted for us today.
Welcome to Minutes with Mango, Life in Motion. I'm your host, Johnny Mango. This is the place where we inquire about lifestyle, culture, and careers. Weekly, we meet with new guests that make a contribution of their insightful stories about their careers and how those careers impact their lifestyle and culture. Hello, everybody. This is Johnny Mango, and welcome to our Minutes with Mango podcast. Today, we have someone who has such a varied background. I thought that he'd be really be an interesting guest for us. And we're going to talk religion today, but we're going to try not to take a side, but who knows? But I want to introduce you to Rick Patterson. Hello, Rick. Welcome.
I appreciate being on. Thank you.
Rick, so one thing we always like to start with here at Minutes with Mango is with our guests is tell us a little bit about your background and who you are.
I appreciate that. I'm actually a pretty plain Jane fella. Relative to religion, though, I think what's most interesting is that I did not grow up in the church. And in fact, as an adult, I was what I call a born-again evangelical atheist. So my path into and out of religion has been pretty arduous as a result of all that. But for the most part, I went to college and got a chemical engineering degree, and I've worked in corporate America nearly all my life, which is crowding 30 years now. And I got my master's and doctoral degrees in ministry, not because I wanted to be a pastor, but which I was a pastor. I got them because I really wanted to understand what religion, what Christ, what these things were really all about, because frankly, I found it impossible to believe all this. So after graduating, I ended up planting a church, starting a new church. I did it unpaid because I was able to stay in corporate America at the time. So they continued to pay my salary and the bills. And I really only left corporate America after my wife and I adopted a sibling group of 4 black kids. And I decided to just pastor the church at that point and be home more for the kids. And I specifically mentioned that the kids are black because that fact, I'm white, but that fact has played a significant role in helping me understand a lot about what's going on in the world, cultural differences between people. And to your point, the fact that there's so many sides being taken today. That little tidbit was a pretty kind of a pivotal turning point for me. So at this point, I'm still employed in corporate America, and I'm doing this sort of event like this podcast here. My kids are all grown, and we're just seeing where life goes right now.
Okay. And you do have a book out. We're going to talk about that too. But I'm really curious. How did you end up with, obviously, you must be white. I mean, how did you end up with 4 black kids?
That all come to pass. Well, my wife and I are biologically childless. We can't have kids. And my mother knew grandma, the kids as grandma, because the kids were they're all related, brothers and sisters. They were staying with grandma, and grandma had to go in for chemo on weekends. So we used to watch her kids on weekends. And eventually long story short, Grandma passed away. They went into foster care with us for a couple of years while they tried to reunite the kids with their parents, and that did not work out. So after a couple of years of foster parenting, we adopted the group, and so it kind of grew into itself, if that makes sense.
So you mentioned that you learned some things about the world. Can you share with us what you learned with having four black children in a white family?
Yeah, the most shocking event there's a lot of shocking, but the most shocking event happened to me when one of my daughters, who at that point, and I tell this story, it's in the book, it's public, it's going to be a pretty strong worded story, but it's public. I want the world to know that. I'm not saying anything out of school here, but when she was in elementary, I was just passing through the house, and she hollered out to me and said, hey, Rick, hey, Rick. I went over and she said, hey, I'm the ugly one, she said. And she said it like she won a prize. That's the weird thing, okay? And what's really frustrating, Johnny, is this is what I learned immediately is as soon as she said those words, I knew what she was going to say to me. I knew why she felt that way. I knew because of her facial features, the color of her skin, the kinkiness, basically her blackness. I knew what she was going to say. And she said, but I didn't let on, right? I was horrified. But I asked why. Why do you feel that way? And she said, well, compared to my sisters, who are also black, but they have much whiter features. That's a big deal. She said, compared to my sisters, I have a wider nose and fatter lips and kinkier hair and darker skin. And she rattled off all these features, about her. And that's when I realized that this whole thing that today we call it systemic racial bias, us white folks, especially in the agricultural work, we get all sort of amped up about that thing, like somebody's calling us racist or something.
Yeah.
But we're not. We cannot deny the fact that I have a very happy, elementary school kid who's telling me that this is the world she lives in. And there weren't people pointing at her saying, you're bad, you're ugly, but she somehow was able to absorb from the system in which she lived that her features were ugly. And so I had to come to grips as a white man with the reality that systemic racial bias exists, but also had to come to grips with that just because it exists doesn't mean I'm a racist. Right. Anyway, that's a long story to say. I had a long learning curve, my friend. Long learning curve.
Do you think it would be, I'm just kind of curious, do you think it would be the same if you had, let's say you had a child in a wheelchair as an example, okay, that a child that didn't fit in with the normal population, you think that child would have experienced the same type of exclusion that this one girl did?
I think it's very possible. I don't know because I didn't have I don't have data, so to speak.
Yeah.
But I think it's very possible. I think it's possible that obese children experience some of that. I believe poverty-stricken children who are unclean, and by that I mean physically just dirtier, they don't smell. You know what I'm saying? I think we have so many realms in which we can exclude, and I don't think that the color of one's skin is. I don't think it's limited to the color of our skin.
Right. Let's talk about your book. The meek shall inherit the earth, rediscovering what it means to be great. And then you've got again in parentheses.
Yeah, it's ironic because it actually, for me, when I went to get my doctoral degree, I had to do a course in the book of Matthew. And I was actually shocked at the Jesus I found there. I was shocked at the radical inclusivity for the outcast in that Matthew. I was shocked because at that point I was a pretty hard-nosed church-going guy, I was shocked to find out that really the only people Jesus came down on were people like me, and I was driven to a sense of humility by that study of the book of Matthew. And I really think, and the reason the words again come after that word there is, I really think it speaks to what we're faced with today. I think in the book of Matthew, I saw Jesus define what greatness looks like. I don't think it's a new idea of greatness. I think it's been there all along. I think it's just a vision of greatness that we don't like to look at.
And how would you describe that greatness that you found?
That's a good question. The way I talk about it in terms of the thing that we're faced with in the world is what I call self-preservation. We have to eat, but it's not just physical self-preservation, it's psychological self-preservation. It's why we exclude, because we psychologically need to survive. And so what I found in Jesus, in the Gospel of Matthew especially, was that he was asking us to turn from a system of self-preservation to a system of self-sacrifice. And it's the exact opposite world in which we're tending to live in. And in fact, it's why Jesus' first words as he started his ministry was the word repent. And I had always understood that word repent means you bad people need to stop doing bad stuff. But that's not what it meant. Literally, that word means, and Jesus wasn't talking to the bad people in the world. He was talking to his disciples when he said that word. He was talking to his own people, the church, his own disciples, the followers. He said, you need to turn from the direction you've been headed and go in the opposite direction. I think that's the challenge I found in the book of Matthew, that the meek shall inherit the earth, the outcast, everything that we think is great, it's the opposite. And Jesus has called us to live into a whole different worldview of what being great means, what it looks like. And it does not look like the picture that's being painted for us today.
So, wow, that's pretty heavy.
I'm addicted to it too, John. I got to tell you, man. I mean, I love the idea of being great as this world defines it. I love the idea of greatness. I'm addicted to it, but I realize the addiction is just not healthy. So I'm right there.
So that's the obviously I was raised in a Christian atmosphere, so I know some of the Bible, but I certainly wasn't a divinity student. But that's the eye of the needle story about the rich man getting through the eye of the needle.
Absolutely. Yes. You're absolutely right.
That's about sacrifice. It looks to me from my perspective, kind of looking at the world, that the Christian movement has kind of split. It's kind of broken in half. You got one side, what is known as the Christian right, and then I don't know if it's the Christian woke or what the other side is. Okay, but
yep.
Can you explain from your perspective, how that may have happened and what you see as the path forward? Is it one side or the other, or is there a merging together of something?
Yeah, I don't know that it ever is one. I don't think that one side or the other is ever a helpful way to approach things. What I do understand is that my own battle, and my battle is that I want to live in the woke Jesus space, but I'm addicted to the religious right space. And what I mean by that is I think what is driving the religious right today is the same thing that was driving fundamentalism in Jesus's day, and that is a desire to be great. I mean, the fact of the matter is, especially when I was becoming a Christian 20, 30 years ago, the Christians were the outsiders, and it's hard being an outsider. It's hard being diminished all the time. It's hard. You start to feel bad about yourself because of your faith and whatnot. And when somebody comes along and says, hey, we can make you great, it's addictive.
Yeah.
It is.
That's a good point.
It's addictive. And so we tend to, all of us, it's not just the church, right? We all have this space that says we can be dry. That's why Jesus said, you can sacrifice your whole soul for the world if you wanted to, but it's because it's so attractive. It is so attractive. And our shame, I use that word a lot, Johnny, our shame really demands that we have this salve put on us that reminds us that we are great. And today's modern Christianity, they're getting that salve.
So let's talk about shame for a minute. How does shame cause us to exclude people? And what's the difference between shame and guilt?
Really, that's a good question. So simply put, guilt says you did something bad. Shame says you are something bad. And oftentimes we feel we are something bad because of what we did. Right? But there's a very, very clear distinction. Guilt is a very, very minor component in our psychological decision making. Shame is a major component. how we view ourselves is really what drives our behavior in the world. And to get at your second question, your first question actually there, um, we need to exclude people because it makes us feel good about ourselves. It makes us feel better, that we're on the inside, that we are, that we are the good and they are the bad. And we really live in a world where we need to have somebody bad to put up, so that we can feel better about ourselves. And that's where the exclusion comes.
So yeah, I'm going back to the religion thing again, but maybe that's part of it. Maybe that's the politicalization of religion has to do with shame, possibly, that I have to see it this way because that's how I'm accepted by my peers.
And more importantly, it's how you're accepted by God.
Right,
And so
right.
as a religious right, for example, you see a lot of us sort of standing up for Jesus, and we
Yeah,
do that because we want Jesus to think well of us. That's our shame talking,
right.
And so you're absolutely right. And our need, even the fact that we have a need to be great again. I mean, Jesus' own disciples were saying, "Hey, who's going to be the greatest?" Right?
Yeah.
Tell us who's the. We've had this addiction since the beginning of time. And what's driving that addiction is shame, because we're so afraid that we're not great. To have somebody tell us we are and we're going to become great, it's addictive.
A few months ago, he was a practicing shaman. We had him as a guest, and he referenced Jesus in a different way, which is very similar to what you're talking about sacrifice and yielding to the principles of Jesus. And in that conversation, we found ourselves saying, "Geez, maybe the apostles got it wrong after Jesus left the earth and got this whole thing upside down." And it
Well,
has to do with what you're talking about.
I don't know. It's good. It's a great question. It's a great conversation. I'm not sure the apostles got it wrong, but certainly I think somebody did somewhere along the way. And, the idea that you're having this conversation with a shaman, I think one of the things that we've been able to exclude as any given religion is other religions. And I think that's such a travesty. I mean, if you look at some of the root commonalities between religions are so deep, I just have to believe we're all looking at the same God. But what we have inside of us is a need to be exclusionary, to say, no, we have the right God and you have the wrong God. And what's driving that is this thing I call shame.
It's the look at me, I'm Sandra D syndrome
Yeah,
from.
absolutely. And we so want God to be happy with us
Yeah,
and mad at somebody else. Have you ever heard the story, I don't have to be faster than the bear, I just have to be faster than you, And it's almost like in religion we're doing that. We don't have to be perfect, but if I can just show that, God should be madder at you than God should be mad at me, well then he's going to come after you first.
so let's talk about your other book that you have out called Shame Unmasked, and there's a subtitle to that, Disarming the Hidden Source of, can't read my own writing, but what's
Yeah,
the name of that book?
your destructive decisions.
Yeah, that's right, Destructive Behavior.
Yep.
So Shame Unmasked, Disarming the Hidden Source of Destructive Behavior. Let's talk about that for a minute. What do you cover in that book?
Well, I start by saying that this idea of shame has been with us since the dawn of time. We've already talked about that a little bit.
Yeah,
And that particular book it's not a religious book, but I use the Bible to show how ingrained this idea of shame is. And particularly, I use the fall as the great example. In theory, the worst decision ever made was driven by shame. And if you read the Bible, it says that Adam and Eve were naked and they felt no shame. Shame was not in the world, or in theory, originally, right?
yeah.
And then when they ate the apple, here's what's fascinating. Then God came looking for Adam, and Adam hid. And I say that's what really is driving our bad behaviors today. And he hid from God. And here's the thing is, oftentimes we think Adam was hiding. God says, why were you hiding, Adam? And Adam says, I was afraid. And we think he was afraid because he did something bad, right? That's guilt. You did bad. So you're afraid that God's going to punish you.
Right.
That's modern Christianity. But what Adam didn't even say that. He says, I'm afraid because I'm naked. He didn't even bring up the apple. He says, I'm afraid because you're going to see me for who I am and you won't like me. That's shame. That's what shame does. And Eve, when she took the apple, the snake said to her, you will be like God. And I tell this story where I was with a female coworker and I said, what do you think Eve was saying there? And Eve was, in his coworker of mine says, Eve was saying she's not enough, that she looks bad, that shame, you are something bad, Eve, and you can fix it. You can fix your shame by doing bad behaviors. And I think that's where we all exist today, is in the spot of Eve. We're all trying, we all suffer with our sense of self, that we are something bad, self-hatred. And those senses of self-hatred are what drive our need to fix it,
Yeah.
to exclude, to harm others. And I think that's really what the entire book is about. And I open up with the story from Genesis. It says, we've been trying to figure this out since the dawn of time. This is not new stuff here.
So as a former divinity student, I have a question for you. It's has to do with Jesus when he was on the earth. Was he arguing with the Pharisees, fellow Jews, or was he arguing with the Roman Empire?
When I see him entirely. And here's one thing I've learned about myself, Johnny, is I'm oftentimes I can be wrong. And that's one thing we all have to admit a little more often, is I could be wrong. But I'm telling you,
Yeah.
when I studied it, I never, ever saw him argue with the government.
With who?
With the government, with the Roman Empire. I never
Right.
saw him arguing I only saw him or see him arguing with what we call the church leadership of those days.
Right.
And
Yeah, that's my perspective too. And I just thought I would ask somebody who's been a divinity student,
that's another thing we're getting wrong today, I'm afraid, Johnny. I mean, I'm sorry to interrupt you, but is that the church today, we're against the government. We've turned it
that's my point.
upside down. Whether you're Democratic or Republican,
right?
We want to fix the government. Instead, even though Jesus spent all his time trying to tell us how to fix ourselves,
which got him into the Jewish politics.
Absolutely, because nobody wanted to deal with themselves, And,
right.
And so, Jesus just spent a lot of time with the church saying, quit trying to fix other people. The problem isn't with other people. My problem is with you. And that's what I heard him say when I went into that, getting my doctoral degree. That's what in the book of Matthew, that's what I heard him saying to me, is he's saying, Rick, my problem isn't with everybody you think I have a problem with. My problem is with you. And the fact that you think I have a problem with everybody.
Right. Well, I had a friend she'd passed away years ago, but she spent a year in an ashram in India. And what she used to talk about in our conversations was how important surrender was. And I never really quite understood it until later in life. But what I'm hearing from you, when you talk about sacrifice, surrender can fall into that too.
Without question. Because surrender, I mean, that's a very self-sacrificial. When you surrender, you are basically, and the Beatitudes are full of that,
Yeah.
Surrender, everything about you, surrender your rights is what you do. And that's very non-American, to surrender your rights.
Yeah.
But you're surrendering your rights to food. You're surrendering your rights to be right. You're surrendering your rights to persecute. And Jesus said, you got to set all that aside and you need to surrender all of it because of this. He said, you need to repent because the kingdom of heaven is near. What you're seeing around you isn't real, he's almost saying. And he's saying, I'm asking you to live in a whole different world. And surrender is a huge part of it.
Yeah, is that how you got to? You're saying that Christianity is a counterintuitive religion?
Absolutely, because everything inside of our being says, in my own being, everything says that we need to survive. everything is about self-preservation
Right.
and everything about Christianity. And I'm saying, I don't mean in exclusion to other religions here, Johnny. I want to make sure I'm emphasizing that. But what I know is Christianity, right? And so the demand of Christianity is you need to repent. You need to pack your bags and go the opposite direction, which is self-sacrifice for others, for people who don't deserve it, for people who you think are the ugly ones. It's not just sacrifice for your friends and your family. And Jesus says, everybody does that. That's what Jesus scolded them. Everybody can do that. That's not what I'm asking you. I'm telling you to do it to the people with the people you don't like. That's what you need to sacrifice for the
Right.
prisoners and for the outcasts and the aliens and all these people you'd prefer just not come around.
Yeah.
It's really
Yeah.
amazing.
I have a relative who volunteers at a prison, and it's pretty amazing the satisfaction they get from that activity. It's been interesting to me to observe that in this person, because it's become a big part of their life because they're helping somebody else.
And what Jesus actually says, he even turns that upside down. He said, this is in Matthew 25. He actually says, that prisoner you're going to see, he literally says this, it's actually me you're going to see in prison.
Interesting.
He says, that hungry person that you fed, that alien that you took in, that's me. Because they said, Lord, when did we see you hungry and feed you? When did we see you in prison and go visit you? When did we see you? And Jesus says, what you did to those, you did to me, he said. And the
Yeah.
opposite is also true, Johnny. All those hungry that were kicking out, all the hungry we're not feeding, all the prisoners we're condemning to hell or whatever, as politicians like to say, we're doing that to Jesus. We don't realize it, but that's what he said.
So how does society, this is a really, modern day question with what's going on in the world right now in our country. How does the population deal with this gets to the open borders thing, and I mean, I don't want to be political, but from a religion point of view, from that philosophy that you're describing, how should one deal with these gang guys that come into the country and cause problems, or anybody that breaks a law? When I say a law that hurts somebody else, how does society deal with somebody like that using the principles you described?
That's a great question. I try and deal with that challenge in my upcoming book because it is a challenge. And frankly, I don't like the answer to the challenge. And the answer is I don't. So part of the problem is Rick Patterson. Part of the problem is me.
Yeah.
And I don't want to give more money, Johnny, to help these people. I don't want to do it. But when I look at Christ in the gospel, that's what I see him telling us to do. So I think how we deal with these situations is we deal with them compassionately and generously. And that's the challenge. And so do people need to go to prison? Absolutely. Jesus never send anybody to prison. He just said, go visit them.
Right.
And I think we need to continue to follow the rule of law, but I think we also need to find a way to feed people and to clothe people. And all those things, Johnny, feeding, clothing, they all cost. It's expensive. And that's the first thing that Jesus can demand. And in my own book, I say, so I can't hardly even tell, that the world that we ought to, give more because I don't do it myself. So the first thing I have to do is I got to start walking the walk myself.
So what you're really sneaking up on, Rick, is we need to surrender our security.
Absolutely. Without question. You're absolutely right. Individually and corporately,
Yeah.
the entire, collectively as a group. But I think the great challenge, the challenge of Jesus was initially, without question, to us individually. So the challenge is to Rick Patterson. How do I follow myself, his footsteps? That's the challenge.
Well, I would think that the ego gets involved in this somehow.
Absolutely. And that's the funny thing about the ego is the ego also finds its source in shame. I used to still do. I consider myself quite a narcissist. Okay. And that's what people don't realize about narcissism and about the ego is that those things are actually sourced in self-hatred, shame.
Uh-huh.
And so what we do is we overcompensate for our self-hatred. We overcompensate by being all bloated and puffy, and you know what I'm saying? And trying to make ourselves look like as a fig leaf. We cover ourselves with fig leaves and we hide behind our bravado and our ego. And so I think all of that is definitely in play, but we can't fix the ego. We got to deal with why the ego is there and why it's so bruised. And the reason for that, I think, is shame.
Yeah, yeah, I can see that. And maybe that's what makes for the division. And like you said, they're chasing the government rather than surrendering to each other and themselves.
Yeah, absolutely.
If I can get the government to go this way, life will be fine. Nobody can bother me.
Absolutely. You know, this is another interesting twist I found in Matthew is that we are all familiar with the choice that the church had one day between Barabbas and Jesus, right?
Huh?
What people don't realize is the name Barabbas in Hebrew means son of the Father. So
Really?
really, yeah, and in Matthew, his name is actually Jesus Barabbas. So on that day, you have two people with the exact same name, Jesus, son of the Father, sitting side by side.
Wow.
And one's an insurrectionist of all things. And we have this image in our mind that insurrectionist is this drooling, lunatic madman. But he's not. He's an insurrectionist. The guy promises to make Israel great again. That's why he's in prison. So Israel wants to become great again. So they go asking for Jesus, son of the Father, but they're not looking for the Christ. They're looking for another one.
Yeah.
And so all of that is driven by exactly the stuff you're talking about.
Wow. Well, Rick, this has been enlightening. I see signs there was a time in my life when I used to travel on airplane. I did a lot of travel in my career, and I was on an airplane every week somewhere in the country, and I used to read. That's where I did all my reading. And for a number of times, I got real into the whole Buddhist philosophy and the Tao philosophies and all these various philosophies. And I think you're right. They all kind of come back to one thing, and hidden in that is the element of surrender. The Buddha sitting under the banyan tree when he realizes that, you just got to let it all go.
Yep. And ironically, too, in Christianity, the idea is suffering, self-sacrificial suffering, right? That self-sacrifice, surrender is suffering. It forms suffering. And I think it's the fourth Buddhist principle is this: life is suffering. And our job is to embrace it and to live.
Yeah, that I think I can't remember if it's the Buddhist, I've read that somewhere that once you accept that life is suffering, it's not sufferable anymore.
And so for me, how do I deal with the immigration crisis? It's going to involve suffering. It's going to involve me giving more, being more generous, being more compassionate. It's going to involve me, all of us, but me in particular, doing something. But to do that, I'm going to have to become a Buddhist, and I'm going to have to just embrace the suffering, you know?
Well, but do you need to be a Buddhist, or you just need to be a human being, being aware?
Well, that's a great question. And my argument is that in the person of Jesus Christ, maybe Buddha as well, I'm not excluding anybody. In the person of Jesus Christ, I saw an image of what a human is actually supposed to look like. So I think it's both, Anna, but I think you're exactly right. If we are to pursue what being truly human looks like, we're going to pursue all those things anyway.
Yeah. Yeah. Wow. Well, I just finished up an interview with someone a week or two ago about humility and leadership, and it follows the same similar path, but in the corporate world, about humility as a leader, being humble with whoever you're leading.
Yep.
And I'm hearing the same thing from you.
Yep, without question. And look at Christ, the most humble leader of all times. Absolutely.
Yeah.
And Buddha. It's true of all of them.
Yeah, it is. It really is.
That's why I say reimagine what it means to be great again, because it's nothing new here. We've been talking about this for centuries.
Well, Rick, our time's running out. Anything you want to add?
No, I really appreciate being here. It's been fun. But thank you for having me.
You're welcome. And maybe we'll have you on again down the road somewhere, because it's an interesting conversation. And I really hope it provokes some listeners to think about their life and what surrender is and what sacrifice is and the importance of it.
Absolutely.
All right. You have a great day, huh?
You too, man. Thank you very much.
All right. Take care. Bye-bye.
Yep. Bye.
You have been listening to Minutes with Mango, Life in Motion. Subscribe to hear a new and unique guest each week as they comment on their life's journey and share experiences with lifestyle, culture, and career. You can always find us at minuteswithmango.com.